We're in the middle of the description of the temple that will be built, says Yezechkel, and we've talked about all the different midot. We've measured out the inside, measured out the outside, and then 43rd chapter begins that he leads me from the gate to the gate that faced east. And here comes the important verse 2. And what's coming from the east, roaring like mighty waters, is the presence of the God of Israel. And the earth was lit up by this presence. So this kvod, this Merkava that left Jerusalem, which Yezechkel talked about 25 years before this, 20 or so years before this, I should say. And we know that happened with destruction of the temple. Now, finally, with the space described, God's presence is coming back. And the vision that I saw was like the vision that was destroyed, that was with the destroyed city, the very same vision I had by the canal in Nahar Kvar. That's the same vision that I saw. And there's a piece of, I think it's the Gemara talks about how it's like there were nine visions. Like Moshe perceived God in a way that was much clearer, and everybody else was like 9 different places away. Because in this verse we have the word mar'eh 8 times and 1 time plural, which is a vision. U'kemareh hamareh shera'iti kemareh shera'iti umarot, that's plural. Kemar'i kemareh asher ra'iti. So the rabbis say that everybody else was like 9 distances away. Moshe was so much closer to God. But the important thing here is Yezechkel seeing God come back. The presence of God enters the temple by the gate facing eastward. And the Spirit carried me. The Spirit carried me to the inner court, and God's presence filled the temple. Phrase that we know from the end of Shemot. When God's presence, the same word, kvod Hashem, the glory of God, fills the temple, and Moshe can't really get in because God is so concentrated. And I heard speech addressed to me from the temple, though the figure was standing beside me. So Yechezkel's tour guide was still with him, but there's now voices that he's hearing from inside. Vayomer Eli ben Adam. He said to me, son of man, right? Mortal. This is God's presence again. So Yechezkel's not like that. He's mortal. Makom kisiv et makom kapat raglai. Asher ashkon shab betoch bnei Yisrael olam v'lo yitam od bnei Yisrael shem kodshi hema u'malchehem biznutam u'figrei malchehem bimotam. Says to me, this is the place of my throne. This is where I rest my feet. This is where I dwell in the midst of Israel. The house of Israel and their kings must never defile my holy name again. Not through blasphemy, not through sexual errors, not through murder. Betitam sipam et sipi u'mezuzatam etzel mezuzati v'akir beini u've'erem v'timu et shem kodshi b'toavatam asher asu v'chalotam ba'api. When they place their threshold next to my threshold and their doorpost next to my doorpost, with only a wall between me and them, they would defile my holy name. And that, I got very angry. There are people like that. They say, I don't want to live in the old city of Jerusalem. I want to be so close to God. Right? You're so close to God, you're in trouble. You're too close to God. And so God says, I'm coming back to you. You better be close. You better behave properly. Ata, we're in Pasuk Tet. If they get rid of the murder and the blasphemy and all the sins, then I will dwell amongst them forever. Right? And here we have, in a sense, again, going back to Shemot, I will dwell amongst them. God says what? I will dwell amongst them forever. Verse 10, Pasuk Yod, Ata ben Adam agei beit Yisrael tabaiti, kalmu me'avonoteim, but do it tochti. So now, mortal man, Yechezkel, I am God, and you are human. And now describe to Bnei Israel, let them know the measurements and the design, and let them not be ashamed, because they can come back from their sins. If they And if they do all what I said, they lay out the temple properly, its exits, the entrances, its plans, and do it exactly what I showed you. Zot Torah Tabayit. Phrase that we have earlier places in the Torah as well. These are the instructions. This is teaching of the house. We're in verse 12. Al Rosh Hahar, Kol Gvulos Haviv Saviv Kodesh Kadashim Yinei Zot Torah Tabayit. This is the entire area that must be holy. These are the instructions for the house. This is the way that the temple needs to be laid out. This is the Torah of the Bayit. And these are the dimensions of the altar. Right, so now we're getting more into, we've had a little bit about the vessels, but again, mostly not. In cubits, it's a cubit and a handbreadth. Okay, and he describes that. From the trench to the lower edge, there's 2 cubits, and from the lower edge to the upper edge, it should also be a cubit wide, 4 cubits in total. And the height of the altar, the hearth, will be 4 cubits, with 4 horns projecting upwards. Now the hearth shall be 12 cubits long and 12 broad, 4 equal-sided squares. And the upper base will be 14 cubits, 14 equal sides, and the surrounding rim shall be a cubit. Okay, so we have here all the descriptions. And again, I just want to point out something else. This is what we really talked about yesterday from the idea of Chazal, of the Shulchan back in chapter 41, the table. It goes from the altar and then calls it a table. Bnei Yisrael, the rabbis, they replace God's temple. If God's temple is no longer there, your table is a mizbeach. Your home is a mizbeach. And so we have the word Zot Torah Habayit. This is talking principally about the temple, but we can extrapolate for those of us who are living today. For the last 2,000 years, when there was no temple, our homes have to be that temple. With verse 18, and so he says, "Oh mortal man, these are the directions for the altar the day that it is erected. These are the burnt offerings. The blood should be spilled on it. You should give the priests and the kohanim from the descendants of Tzadok, those who will be eligible, a young bull." And what's interesting, this verse, we'll talk about this more in the books of Zechariah and other books, and Ezra, where some of the people who came back with kohanim were not seen as being acting properly as kohanim. And it's already said here to Yezechkel that only some of the kohanim will be able to serve in the second temple. Not all of them will be believed and trusted to have fully followed the ways of the ways and the demands of the priesthood. Okay. We're in 20. Okay, and then you have to go and you have to sanctify the vessels like Moshe and Bezalel did back then. 21. And take a bull and bring it as a burnt offering in the designated area. And the second day, you shall bring a goat. The first day was a bull. The second day is a goat. This again, just to sorry for the word, but to christen the temple. When you've completed the ritual, the purging, the christening, you will offer a bull without a blemish and a ram. Then the priest will go and they'll throw salt on them. Remember the table yesterday, the salt, and offer them up as a burnt offering. For 7 days you will bring a goat and a bull and a ram, and they will all be unblemished. Again, 1 week, God's home, creation, Mikdash, Mishkan are all like creation. 7 days, Shivat Yamim, verse Chavav. 7 days you will purge the altar and it will be consecrated. And look at verse 27, sounds like Kiddush. And when those days are completed, on the 8th day, you take over. And the regular sacrifices by the priests will be brought, that the sanctification, the consecration of the temple is done. And now we are ready to go back on that 8th day, back to regular business. The Jews, once again, approaching God in the temple, in the hope, as Yezechkel says will happen, that God's Merkava, God's Kavod, God's chariot, God's presence will return from the east, from Bavel, back to Jerusalem, to be together there once again with Bnei Yisrael.